I will be making a color wheel with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 concentric circles to complete design problem number 10A, which is the wet wheel or wet medium color wheel. Up here I have pre-drawn a slightly larger than 8-inch diameter color wheel. I want to make sure that the spaces that I marked off in the color wheel are large enough to make it easy to get a brush into those spaces and work as I go. This sheet of paper is from design problem 10A that shows the color wheel layout for a split primary palette. We're using a split primary palette because split primaries, that is a cool and warm version of primary colors, gives you the opportunity to make the largest range of colors with the fewest number of tubes of paint. It's the most economical way that artists can create lots and lots of subtle colors without having to buy a separate tube of paint to make those colors. And the split primary is probably closer to what artists use than what designers use. Artists are working with pigments, and people who are working with digital design are using alphanumeric codes and hexadecimal codes to build their colors, and those colors are produced differently than reflected off the surface. So one of the things I need to do after laying out a 12-part color wheel, which is relatively simple to do, and you can see it in the earlier video, is that I need to divide the outer ring of my wheel so I can paint the 2 samples of the actual paints that I'm going to use in the outer ring. So I have sort of a reference point of, and I'm going to just draw roughly halfway through these 2 circles here. Be nice if I had, yeah, I'll do it like that, just roughly halfway. I'm going to use, just subdivide that line. I'm passing this ruler through the center of the color wheel, and on one side I'm going to put yellow, warm, and on the other side, and I don't have much room to write it here, yellow, cool. So those will be painted in these 2 areas of the color wheel, and I can extend this, extend the section of the color wheel a little bit so I know where I'm going. The cool yellow and the warm yellow, you'll see it annotated on your list as Y for yellow, W for warm, or Y, C for cool. And this will allow you to take advantage of one of the most common characteristics of color, and that is color temperature. Most people know the difference between warm and cool colors, but don't know much about primary, secondary, and tertiary colors. They don't know about complement mixtures. They don't know about the complex interrelationships that are built into a color wheel, like split complementaries and triadic relationships and things like that, which we'll talk about later in the course. But they do know warm colors versus cool colors. Those that are dominated by yellow and orange and red are warm colors, and those that are dominated by blues and greens, those are the cool colors. Because we're using pigments, we are subject to what's available to produce artist color. And that is, we're not mixing light like the digital folks are, we're mixing pigments. So pigments, are not always the most accurate materials to use. So we want to get the most out of our pigments by using warm and cool versions of our pigments. And then you can start recognizing all the complexities of color mixing when it comes to using subtractive color, which is the kind of color you get when light bounces off a surface. And that's what pigments do. They reflect a wavelength of light that you call green or red or orange. So I've drawn a little line between yellow, warm yellow and cool yellow, and I plan on painting my paints, painting little dots of color there. If you'd like, I suggest that you write warm and cool on your tubes, and those are listed in design problem 10A. What you might want to do is take your tube, open it up, and just squeeze lightly. Sometimes you're going to get a little bit of binder on there and a little bit of cool yellow on the cool side. And sometimes just a dot is all that's needed. And a warm yellow that we're going to be using to mix from the warm side of our wheel. Okay, and these paints, right now these paints are brand new out of the tube. And they are squeezing out a little bit of the binder fluid. That is, there's not much pigment in that little swatch that I squeezed out. So what I'm going to do, and you may find this to be true with gouache paint or water-based paint, is I'm squeezing the tube back and forth to try to mix the color in the tube. You don't need to do this with acrylic color, but you do need to do it with a water-based medium without a polymer emulsion base to it. And I'm squeezing that, and then I'm going to dab up a little bit of that extra material with a scrap of paper. What I might do is just take that off the surface because it doesn't contain much in the way of pigment, and that's what I want you to see. So I scrape that away, and I'm going to squeeze a little bit of my paint out and see if I can try, that's a little bit better. Now I've got some paint on my, here that represents a warm yellow, and hopefully you can see that there's a little bit of difference between the two. This is a little greenish, and I can possibly make it more greenish by dipping a moist brush into that little area or that little dot of color and smushing it around with a brush. Remember to always wet your brushes before you use them and then squeeze out the excess water. So I'm gonna maybe spread this cool yellow out a little bit all over that exterior ring number 1. And I want to see what that paint that I'm using really looks like when it's blended, and give me an idea of what the two different primary colors represented by a warm yellow and a cool yellow. Right now I'm working on cool yellow. A cool yellow is a yellow that is biased towards green. That is, you might find that the name on your tube is lemon yellow or something like that. So I'm just smoothing off that little paint by hand on the outer ring, and then I'm going to rinse my brush so that I have no residue in it. And because I squeezed out a nice little ball of it over here, I'm going to put my warm color right up next to it, near my little dividing line. And right now this is a little crude. It's actually easier to paint straight lines than it is curved lines, because with a straight lines or straight edges, you can just tape them off and paint right up next to the edge. But this will give you an idea of what the two yellows are going to look like that you're using for the split primary color wheel. And there is, and it isn't dry yet, a gouache sample of Talon's paint with my warm and my cool yellow. When those two sections dry, I'm going to mix warm yellow with cool yellow to make what I consider a standard yellow. And those standard yellows can be found on your color wheel that comes in your little pocket color wheel that comes in your kit, or you can just blend to eye. So the other two sets of primaries, split primaries, are blue and red, and because I'm working towards the warm side of the color wheel, I know that red is going to go on this side. So again, I'm going to place a little divider for my red. And I know that warm yellow and warm red will make beautiful oranges across my wheel. On the outside of the color wheel, I'm going to start to label the colors that I expect to be in there. So taking a warm yellow and mixing it, I'm going to first encounter a yellow orange, and orange, a red orange, and down here is my red. Here are my two reds. I've marked one as a cool red, and that is like what I'm going to use to mix this half of the color wheel, or this quadrant of the color wheel. Not exactly a quadrant, a third. And I'm going to use this warm red to make my reds and yellows and oranges, or red orange, orange, and yellow orange. So I'm squeezing the tube again, sort of just manipulating it, sort of massaging it so that I get a decent color out of it. Then I'm going to make sure that this is my warm red. I'm going to put a little W outside of that, and I'm going to put a little C outside of this. So it turns out that for Talon's paint, they use a vermilion, which is a color. Let's see if I can open this tube. Can't open the tube. So if you have difficulty opening your tubes, use a pair of pliers. Be gentle because the plastic cap can fall off after a while. And I'm going to squeeze out right in this narrow margin where I intend to use my pigment pens to write the names of the colors. I'm going to squeeze out a warm red. And again, I'm getting a lot of binder despite the fact that I massaged the tube. So what I may do is squeeze out that extra binder, which is it's usually a gum arabic in watercolors and gouache. Be careful, it'll come out on your hands when you least expect it, so make sure you have a wet rag around. I'm going to pick up that because it's sort of smearing a little bit. And I recommend that you actually squeeze these out in a palette first. I'm squeezing them right out of the tube because I wanted you to see the tubes. So these are my, I'll go back and make this dot. This is my warm red from Talon's gouache. And this is an interesting color paint. It looks kind of dark, darker than I expected. But it represents a red that makes wonderful red oranges, oranges, and yellow orange when mixed with a warm yellow. So all of these colors will be, this one will be vermilion or warm red, and I will start mixing orange and yellow orange with a warm yellow. And the warm yellow paint is called yellow, okay? Sometimes it's called deep yellow because it tends to be more towards orange, but here is my cool and warm version of yellow. Now I have just painted the warm version of red. I'm going to rinse my brush. And I like to use several little jars as I work to get my colors in and clean my brushes. There's a certain brand of yogurt called Oui yogurt, O-U-I, French for yes. And they make these, I don't know how they can afford to do this, but they make these wonderful little containers that, this is the artist yogurt, because you can go ahead and fill a bunch of these little containers and have a set of brushes for each of the colors that you're using if you like, to get your brushes nice and clean. Because what you want to do with this exercise is get the purest, most vibrant 12 hues you can possibly